All right, well, welcome to the podcast, Faith for Real Life. We are in a series called New Year, New You, where we're looking at 5 elements of health. And today we're talking about financial health. And finances and money is something that people generally don't really love talking about, at least with other people. There's a lot of, privacy about that. And that's understandable. But God loves talking about money. In the Bible, there's about 500 verses on prayer, about 500 verses on faith, but 2,000 on money. And so the reason why the Bible talks so much about money is because it's important to us. And so because it's important to us, God wants us to understand what it looks like to flourish in that area and to be healthy in that area. And so we want to help you do that through a conversation with our guest today. And so we have Austin with us. And so Austin, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you work and why you're here.
Absolutely. So I've been at Hope City for about 15 years, and I work at a bank. So talking about money, I've been at TD Bank for about 12 years now. I've been a bank manager for about 8. And my favorite thing is just being able to learn about people's lives and their situations and truly be able to digest that so I can live out my best life as well, and then share those stories, be able to help other people through different situations and struggles, and truly just authentically give advice, which is really neat.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about financial health today. And as we go along, that definition will become clearer and clearer and what we mean exactly when we say that. This isn't going to be investment advice. So if you're looking, for a way to 2 times your money in the next 30 days, this is not that, okay? This isn't going to be, in competition with Grant Cardone or Robert Kiyosaki or the Rich Dad Poor Dad or anything like that. We're not pumping a meme coin or anything like that. We're talking about financial health. And really what we're doing is we're looking at how does the Bible talk about money and how does that play out in the flourishing of people's finances as you see it in the real world, right? Because you work with people who may or may not be Christians, but let's just assume that they have no understanding of what the Bible says about money. And you would see on a day-to-day basis, you're like, oh man, if you just listen to what the Bible said about this would actually solve a lot of your problems. So we're going to talk about how the Bible is so practical and so useful about money, but also how you see that kind of play out in the real world. But before we kind of get to that, I'd love to just kind of hear some personal reflections from you and your own story about money and financial health. And so how has your experience with money shaped your view on what it looks like to be, financially healthy and flourish in that area?
Yeah, I think it's changed over the years. Growing up, I was never really given a weekly allowance or anything like that.
You never get an allowance?
I know.
How'd you buy them chips at the store, man? Did you steal them?
I'll tell you later. Right, but something like that where it's like when I got money, it was like you tried to hoard it and then you'd spend it on something really big, right? Because it was so scarce to me. And I think when I think about my relationship with money over the years, it's become a lot more, a lot less scary. Because I've just tried to understand it a lot more.
I love that because money is so scary to people. It
can be.
Yeah.
Well, and I say this all the time that money's very emotional, right? And so when when you talk to your friend about money, or like if you're saying like, "Oh, can I pay back for something?" Like it almost hurts to even say those words, like, "Can I pay back for that?" But whenever I tell somebody I'm a banker, it's like the floodgates open up, and then they're telling me their life story. They're telling me how much debt they have, or what are the mortgage rates right now. And it's a safe space that I love creating.
Yeah.
And so over the years, it's gone from I used to hoard my money because I didn't know when I would see my next dollar as a kid to I got my first job when I was 14. I worked at Arby's literally down the street from the church. Yeah, it was great.
Oh, man.
Nothing
against Arby's, but
I
can't.
Once a year, I'll treat myself now.
They just opened one up by my house.
Oh, don't tell me that.
And I was like, those things still exist. Nothing against Arby's, okay? I actually have a friend who is sponsored by Arby's.
Okay.
And she's like this TikTok star. She's awesome. And they gave her this Arby's smelling tracksuit. It's like,
did they soak it in the meat?
I don't know what they did. I don't know. Okay. But anyway, that's the thing.
Don't go near a dog park.
Okay. So working at Arby's.
So I worked at Arby's, then I first saw my first paychecks, and I was, nothing against my parents, but I was just never taught about money, right? I was never really told put your 10% away or do this with your money. So all I saw was money coming in and I'm like, well, now I have money. So I just blew it all. every single paycheck. And, you know, when I think right now where I'm at in my life is really props to my wife, because she really helped me say, like, we need to save money. You know, if we're going to get married one day, if we're going to like have a down payment for a condo or a house, you know, you need to learn how to save. And so then I started working at the bank, seeing people's stories, and really putting that into practice.
Yeah. Did she have some sort of financial background or
not at all?
teaching?
It was just like her parents instilled that in her.
Okay.
Right. And so like they came to this church their whole lives. And so they're like, this is how you tithe. This is how you save. You don't buy something unless you have all the money for it.
Yeah.
And so where my story was a little opposite, where it's my parents' financial health was, if you could afford the monthly payment on something, that was healthy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And both perspectives in a way are right. You know, there was nothing being taught that was wrong. But one of those gets you a little bit farther ahead than the other.
Yeah.
Right.
I bet you there's a lot of people listening who would say something similar. Maybe it was their parents. I don't know the psychology of, you know, our behavior with money. It's, you know, in childhood experience. But the reality that so many people don't have really any sort of, not even just formal education, but any, you know, principles of money that have been passed down to them, whether it's from their parents, but even school. I always thought that was so strange that they never taught this stuff in school. You know, they teach you about, you know, many different things, you know, character stuff, which is obviously important, how to play nice with others, right? Yeah. How to have grit and get things done. And they prepare you to go to college or prepare to get a job. But then typically people work to get money. Yeah. That's usually why people work, right? Yep. Work is a blessing in of itself. And we're actually be talking on this podcast what professional health is, and it is a blessing. But we work to pay the bills, to put food on the table. So, but no one ever really teaches us what to do with that end product, right? With that money. Where does it go?
Even like you were saying, like in school, you have CALM. Right, career and life management, which I'm like, however long ago I took that, and it was kind of a joke.
Mine was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of a joke, right? Like they don't actually teach you practical things on what do you do with your money that are actually applicable in the real world. Yeah. They give you surface level information about all these topics, and it's frustrating because when I see people coming in to the bank or just having conversations like friends of mine, they are starting at the ground level every single time, and it's frustrating because I'm like, I wish our education system, I wish there was just better things to give common sense finances to everybody. Yeah. And there's not really.
And I actually think the church can really play a wonderful role in that, in society, yes, but let's say more particularly within families and within kids, youth ministries, even kids ministries, to be able to teach some of the things that the Bible has to say. Because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the Bible has a lot to say about money. And my conviction of a pastor is that money is one of the, if not the most reliable indicator of the condition of somebody's heart.
And a lot of totally times, true.
Yeah. A lot of times we don't put those two together, but it really is. Jesus says that in Matthew 6, right? Where your treasure is, your heart is, right? So don't store up your wealth here on earth.
Absolutely. And like, it's funny because it's like, if you show me your account statement, I know what priorities you have. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, I'll go through and like somebody's trying to be like, oh, I want to buy a house. I'm like, well, you went to McDonald's every day for the last 30 days. Yeah. If you didn't, you'd have enough for a down payment.
Do you think McDonald's is more expensive or less expensive than regular groceries right now? Off topic.
Well, the CEO just came out and said that we're going to try to make food more affordable. So they actually lowered their prices for McDonald's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
Which was actually very impressive.
Yeah. Plugs for McDonald's and Arby's.
There
already.
You go, man.
Yeah. Although our plug for our Arby's wasn't really a plug for them.
But I think it's very true. When you look at somebody's account history, or if you look at their statements, and like I just do that whenever we're doing an application for a mortgage or something like that, you really see where people's priorities lie, right? Like I can tell if somebody's tithing or not. Yeah. And not that I'm judging them, but you can just, you're able to see where are you actually spending your money? Yeah. Do you have some kind of savings plan in place? Are you thinking about where your money's going, or is it just kind of coming and going out without a thought? Yeah. Because nowadays it's so easy for us to just tap our cards, tap our phones, and it's not physical cash, right? Like it's not like I'm not sacrificing this money. Like when I was a kid and I got $1, I'm like, I physically have this loony in my hand.
My kids love money.
Yes, I know. And now it's just different because it's not like you see your money anymore. You're like, oh, I got a email saying my paycheck came in or a notification, and you just see the dollar amount, right? And then you just kind of go along with your day. Where before, like, even 15, 20 years ago, like people would get their physical check, they'd have to go into the bank, they would either take out cash, and like we still see a lot of checks, but like it was just different, right? And so whenever we were telling people, even nowadays, to budget or to think about those things, like take out cash, it's harder to give it away. Even to Starbucks. If you're used to going to Starbucks, it's harder to give your $10 bill over to the barista than it is to just tap your phone or load your app.
I learned that when I was 25, 26, and I read Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover.
Yeah.
That really was my first dip into any sort of financial education that actually revolutionized my life. And I still adhere to those principles in a lot of ways. But it's just Bible. That's kind of all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so let's get a little bit into the nitty gritty. Thank you for sharing kind of your personal stuff. I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are some of the financial habits or behavior patterns of people that you would consider financially healthy, right? You see all these different statements. And what I like about it is that for you, it's not a judgment thing when you look at this. It's not an emotional thing. It's data. Right? It actually kind of tells you, right, what's the priorities to people.
I appreciate you saying that it's data because if you ask my wife, like I'm a total Excel nerd. I love looking at reports and charting and stuff like that. And so it's like,
it's a good time.
If I see a friend or something and they're like, oh, here's my personal information, I'll forget it the moment we start having that conversation. And so there's like zero judgment. I just love digging into those numbers.
I'd be so nervous. I don't know why. Like I have nothing to hide, but if I printed out my bank statement and gave it to you, that would actually be super fun to do that live. Like, ooh.
Let's go. Next time.
Yeah, next time. Maybe we can like superimpose it on the screen right here. You can see my January.
Like AI.
Yeah. I actually don't want you to see my Christmas spending. This was an expensive Christmas. We didn't even try, and it just, man, it's hard. Life is expensive. Anyway, let's talk about what are some of those financial habits that you see people have, or behaviors or patterns that you would consider financially healthy?
Yeah, I think if I were to break it down to something really simple, it would be people that are financially healthy, whether they're in the church or not, have a really strong budget. They have goals that they've set for themselves, and they just have a regular check-in process with their spouse or with some like their financial advisor or something like that.
Okay.
And so essentially, you know where your money is coming in and going out. You know what you're trying to save for, or what your priorities are for your money, or what you want God to do with your money. And you have a regular process for you to check in with yourself. Because it's funny how, like, New Year's, for example, if somebody sets like, I want to lose this amount of weight, if you don't check in with yourself daily, weekly, monthly, you'll probably forget about that goal.
Sure.
Right? And so you need to make sure that with your finances, which are so critical, every single person in the world deals with money. You have money coming in, it's in your pocket, it's in your bank account, and we don't spend enough time working out that muscle.
Why do you think that is? You think it's fear? Is it shame?
Back to emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like it's you're trying to living with the Joneses. You're trying to, it's a consumerist society where all you see on social media, all you see everywhere is, I don't have enough. And it's frustrating when you don't need everything, right? We're in a pretty blessed society right now. And I think, you don't need the latest iPhone. You don't need the latest Lululemon Mickey Mouse shirt. Right? That you're going to wear once that I did at Disney. I know.
Oh, personal.
I know. But you don't need all that stuff. Right? It's nice to splurge, but like set aside a certain amount of money every month to splurge.
So this is interesting as you're saying this, because this ties in, again, pastorally on that contentment piece that, when Paul says, I've learned to be content in all circumstances, I've learned to, be content in plenty, right? And I've learned to be content in want and in scarcity. And I think that, I imagine, as I hear you talking, that has a huge part to play in people's finances, where I'm actually just not content. I would just be happier if I had this thing, and I don't have this thing. So I'm going to maybe fudge some common sense things or logical ideas, because money's emotional, in order to reach happiness, right? And then you get that new Mickey Mouse Lululemon shirt.
Absolutely.
Or for me, a Tacoma. I imagine if I got a new Tacoma, that my life would be perfect. We all have those things. We just but we realize we get those things. You're like, that didn't do it. And it's a cycle.
Because you're trying to feel something.
Yeah.
Right? But I actually see some of the happiest and most financially healthy people are the most frugal in giving. Which is really cool. And so one of my peers, he's a branch manager in Vancouver. He drives, I think it's a 1992 Dodge Neon. Okay. And it's worth like $2,000. And he's like, he's well off. Like he could definitely afford a new car.
Have you ever seen a souped up Neon before?
Oh yeah,
those are awesome.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's not his, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crappy. It's rusted. It's dark green. It's gross. He sent me a photo of it.
Yeah.
Like, why are you still driving this thing? He's like, because it works. He's like, I just need to get to work and back.
Yeah.
I'm not driving my little ones. I'm not it's just me. It works. I don't need a new car. And, he's like, I'm content with the image it poses. He's like, he wears a nice suit to work, like he looks all well put together. He just drives a crappy car because he doesn't need a new car. He doesn't need to impress anybody. And I think when you start comparing yourself is when you lose.
I think that's the principle here. It's not drive a bad car.
Right.
The principle is I don't need to prove myself to anybody
Right.
where my worth is.
Yep.
Right. And again, as a believer, it's like to know where your worth is, which is not in your bank account, which is not in your material, but in being, made in the image of God, being loved by him. If you can kind of get that in your bones, that would change your money habits.
Totally.
Right?
And you change how you see your actual money and what it does for you. Right. Yeah. I see a lot of my non-Christian clients and my Christian clients have the same mentality, which I'm like, I just want you to become a Christian because you would be such a good Christian with how you spend your money. But
this is a problem for Christians too.
Absolutely, right? Because like we see a lot of people that are
because we live in this world, right? We live here, and you cannot be affected by the 24/7 messaging all around you and what you see, right?
Unless you fully unplug and go live as a hobby farmer out in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, but even then, you'd still have greed because Jesus is talking to people who didn't have social media or Amazon, right? And it was still an issue. Greed
Amazon's a bad one.
Greed isn't yeah, it's true. I did that this morning for deodorant. I needed it. Anyway, it's like the non-sweat. Sometimes when I'm preaching, I sweat. So I found this clinical deodorant. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's worth it.
Okay, let me know.
I'll send you a picture after. Links in the show notes below to Arby's, to McDonald's, and to
deodorant.
Degree.
Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So maybe on the flip side, talk about some of those healthy patterns that you said.
Yeah.
You talked about, hey, just talking about it, checking in, some of that basic stuff. You mentioned budgeting, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit. Budgeting is telling your money where to go, instead of wondering where it went.
Yeah, literally having whether it's sticky notes and you're like, I took this sticky note, moved it to this side of the page, or it's a fancy Excel.
Yeah.
It's whatever works for you. And so, for myself, I have an Excel where it's like I have all of my income sources, which is one, and I have all of my expenses, right, which are many. And so then you're like, where am I landing, right? Or what does my budget look like when I get to next month? And I'm checking in with myself to make sure it got there next month.
And if you see at the end of the month, there's not enough, right, to meet my bills. There's not enough to meet my goals. It allows you to shift things up. Now, there's a plan for it. There is periods of people's lives, and there's people watching. It's like, you know what? I don't know how to generate any more income, because the way to fix that is to generate more income, right, or reduce expenses. Those are the two things that you can do. And I do want to be sensitive because there are people listening or watching who they're in a period right now where they're trying to find work and that income thing is tough, or they're in a job but they just don't know how to make more money. They don't have the time for it, or there's an extraneous circumstance, or there's a really big bill that they can't get around. There's those scenarios. And so we're not necessarily talking about that.
Right.
We're talking about, just that scenario where people just aren't aware of what's coming in and what's going out. And so they kind of just keep on spending. I was reading that for every dollar that a Canadian makes, they owe $1.80.
Yeah, and it's actually just gone up to about $2.10.
Okay.
Yeah, which is over double.
So that's scary.
Yeah.
Right. And I imagine for some people, if they saw that on paper, they'd be like, I got to change. Yeah. Right. And so budgeting, is a key one.
Yeah, it's massive. And I think when you're able to budget, biblically, you're able to feel like you actually have more control because you can relax a little bit more.
Right.
As a Christian, I don't feel like I'm living by God's rules. I don't feel like he's controlling me. I feel like he's set up a parameter for me to have, the most successful life I possibly can. And I just have to listen to him. I have to have a relationship with him. If you're able to think about that with your money as well, where it's like, if you're able to set up parameters for your money so that you can be as successful as you can within your finances, you're actually going to be more free, which is cool.
Not less free.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Budget actually creates freedom. Yeah. Some people think kind of the more restriction in that area, but it's just not true.
Totally.
Maybe just an aside, I have a story about that. I remember I moved into my home about 4 years ago, and there's this big old ugly house that we got for cheap because it was big old and ugly, right? And it had a really dilapidated fence, and we had a dog at the time, and we actually still have that dog. It didn't die, sorry. That got really sad quick. And we had three daughters. We still have 3 daughters as well.
Okay, good.
And when we didn't have that fence up, it was it was sort of miserable because it's wintertime and the kids are stuck inside, but they couldn't really go play outside in the backyard because they didn't have a fence, because we had a little bit of a coyote infestation and we were living kind of closer to an LT line. So there were some people kind of moving behind our house that, we didn't exactly trust around our kids. And so that was less free when we didn't have a fence. But as soon as we put that boundary up, we can send our kids outside to have snowball fights, or we can make forts with them, or let the dogs out, whatever. It actually created freedom. The restriction and the boundaries created freedom. And I'd say that a budget, but also the kind of biblical guidelines on giving, that's that fence that allows us to actually enjoy the backyard. That's that fence that gives us the freedom. Yeah.
Right. But you couldn't keep the old one up either. Right. Like sometimes you need to update things.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that it's relevant. That's actually going to be working. And so, a lot of people just don't continuously look at their budget. They don't continuously check in with themselves. So you might set a budget at the beginning of the year, might not last all year.
Right.
Things change.
Yeah.
You need to make sure
Netflix prices go up.
Oh, right. Subscriptions. You might I didn't realize I'm 18 subscriptions in.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's
that's a whole nother
crazy.
podcast subscription creep. Anyway, we'll talk about that.
Whole list. How do you save money on subscription? That's crazy.
So we talked about checking in and just being familiar with what's coming in, coming out, and then actually creating a physical budget, right? So you can know where your money's going and how much is coming in. So that's vital. I'd like to kind of broach the topic of generosity, because when it comes to faith, Christian faith, and money, tithing and giving, that's always a topic. And that actually, when I preach on that, or when I see Pastor Phil preach on that, you always see people kind of get up and leave, right?
No way.
It is the sermon that people just like, I don't want to be here. and there's a variety.
I can see people tensing a little bit, like, oh no, they're
you can feel
money.
it in the room, and I love it. Oh, I love it so much when I just know that I'm hitting a nerve. There's something about it. I don't know. Anyway, something that the Lord needs to work on my heart.
Message is hitting hard.
Well, you just know that you're dealing with something that really matters to people, and they just don't want to go there. Often because there is shame when it comes to money, right? There's disappointment in there, and people don't want to face that, right? And so the same thing can happen when we're talking about, a sexual sin or something that someone's going through. You can feel it in the room when it's connecting with people. And so whenever you're preaching on money, particularly on the giving and tithing aspect of things, you can just feel the room just be like, don't tell me where to put my money, right? And there's something about that.
I remember a couple of years ago, Pastor Phil did a sermon, and he's like, here's a couple different examples on how to break down your budget.
Yeah.
And after out in the lobby, I'm like, all I heard was complaints. People were like talking to each other, like, who's going to spend 10% on clothing? Who's going to do this? I'm like, guys, it's a format. Like all they wanted to do was complain when he's trying to give you tools on how to be better, or not how to be better, but how to help yourself. Right? Just think about it a little bit.
Yeah, he preached one a couple years ago. I wonder if I could pull up. It was so good and so helpful on it. One of the best. When Phil, man, he can teach sometimes, and he does a really good talks on money. I forget what series it is. Anyway, maybe we'll pull it up. Okay, but I do want to talk about generosity. I have seen personally, generosity has been. I'm not over exaggerating when I say that it has been the catalyst for my faith over the last 10 years.
Really?
It has been. Okay. I would say that if there's one thing that I could link back to becoming financially healthy, it has been generosity, which is counterintuitive. I know because, when you give and it's a large chunk of your money, it feels like the opposite of that. It feels, again, restrictive and like, oh, what am I doing? But God has done something in my heart. And my story is, when I became a pastor when I was young, 21, I started my first ministry appointment. And the church at the time, which I had a wonderful experience there, but what they did financially was they required all the pastors to tithe. And the way that they did that was they took it right off the paycheck.
Gotcha.
So it was, when I get my pay stub, right? Pastors do get pay stubs. Okay. We still are subject to CRA and auditing. Anyway, when I got that paycheck, it just had my tithe taken off right underneath the federal income tax, right? So it was like a God tax. Yeah. And so I was there for 10 years.
Totally
and I just sort of paid the God tax.
Yeah.
And there was no, and that's fine. I checked the box, right? And I was okay with that.
I allowed it, yeah.
Yeah. But my heart wasn't connected to it at all. It just was something that I just did. And then when I moved to Edmonton and I got a different ministry appointment and I had to actually be confronted with am I going to give? It was hard. Even though I'd just been doing it for 10 years, technically, when I actually was forced with this idea of sending my money, there was something that was new that was happening. There's this new questions of trust and who was going to provide. Was it going to be all on me or was it going to go? And I've gotten into the habit I really take, the first fruits idea very literally. I'm not saying that everyone should, but I do. And the reason why is I found that the more I'm confronted with the question, who am I going to trust with my money, the more I realize that I can trust God with my money, and the greed that is wrapped in your heart just becomes free, because like, I trust God. He's going to provide for me. And so anytime I get a little notification, on my banking app that I got, income come in, whether it's through my wife's paycheck or mine or something else, Facebook Marketplace, $50 toaster sale, I stop and I tithe. And I give on that. I don't wait till the end of the year. Some people do. That's totally fine. Or monthly or whatever. I do it every single time. And it was funny because my mom is the bookkeeper here.
Oh, she must hate that.
Oh man.
It's
It's just like 10 times a month, you're getting in this e-transfer. But I have found that I'm just confronted with that. I'm constantly saying, no, God, I trust you with this. And so that has been my story, that generosity has been such a catalyst for my faith. And my biggest regret as a youth pastor, my first 10 years of appointed ministry, was that I actually didn't teach that to kids, right?
Yeah.
I didn't teach that to students, that they will never, someone else has to pick it up, but I never taught them the blessing of generosity and God's plan for it in their life. So my question is for you. You're in a different world, right? Have you seen generosity impact people's behaviors with money, their financial health? Have you seen that in your world, in the banking world?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like the United Way is a big contributor, even for bankers, right? Like internally, we have like a really big campaign around that. And they try to really amplify, what does your generosity go towards? As a Christian, and you're looking at like, what does your money go towards, right? You're kind of, some people like to think about it like not as a God tax, but like you're buying into the church, right? When the church has successes, when they are able to say like, hey, we took our youth kids to this event,
Right.
and they only had to pay half, right? Because of the generosity of the church. Or we're able to build this building in, Uganda, right? And because of the generosity of the church. When people connect that to, well, my $10 a month helped contribute to that, they look at it a lot differently, right? Where I think a lot of people are blinded by, the automatic withdrawal from their account to the church as a tithe, which is great, by the way, because then it's sticking to your budget, or you're just blindly giving, or, your heart's not in it, like you said before. I think that's where it loses its luster, because, when you are constantly surrounded by something special, it becomes less special. And so when we think about tithing, it's really important, or giving or being generous, it's really important to constantly remind yourself of like cool stories like that. And so like even with my team at work, every day we have what's called a DSU. It's super cheesy, but it's like a daily stand-up where we talk about stories that get us excited, And so yesterday, let's say we had an appointment with a client and we're able to help consolidate their debt. And, their monthly payments now going to making them save and tithe more, save and be more generous. That's so cool to see. I'd much rather help somebody completely fix all of their money problems and then still be able to get a chunk of change out of it. And then to see them say like, oh, we actually want to make sure that we're like giving gift cards to a homeless person when we see them and having them stacked in our car. Or like, I want to help with this organization, right? Like that's just amazing for us to see. And like, I love being able to be part of those stories. But the catalyst to this whole thing is reminding yourself of those stories.
Yeah.
And so...
Which we try to do sometimes with announcing, hey, this is what we're doing as a church, right? And you got to be a part of. And so
but too often we're just in our own little bubble, right? Where you just see the world through your own lens, your own perspective, your own set of glasses. And it's hard for you to change that perspective and hear those stories of generosity because we're not constantly being reminded of them, right? And so, if I were to even ask you the question of what generosity did you see come out of what you gave?
Yeah. Like, and what's the impact of that?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to do it. It's another to see the repercussions of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where I think like you're connecting the dollars that you gave. My daughter would say $bucks from Bluey, but those $bucks that you gave, what did that actually impact?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we see that, and people want to see that. I come from the other angle where I'm motivated. I don't want to say it like this, like it's altruistic, but I just love the idea of trusting the Lord with my money. I'm actually not as interested as what happens with it afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. There's just sort of a trust there where I'm actually not, I'm giving this to the Lord through the local church, and I just trust that. And I'm part of those teams, so that's a little bit, I guess there's a conflict of interest in some ways there, but I just trust, right? I'm just like,
Right.
I just. But then if someone comes to my door, which they have regularly, especially with New Year,
Yeah.
about fundraising, I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit more suspicious, right?
Right.
I'm like, well, I don't want to give to you right now because I actually don't know anything about this organization, right? But I trust the church.
Do I want to give you my bottles?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And so for me, I'm actually not as concerned. And I have seen the dark side of people being overly concerned. Like, I'm not going to give because the bathrooms are really nice at this church. So, and you're not giving to, poor people in the way that I would, right?
Right.
And so because the charitable reaches of the church and the social components of the church don't align with their preferences, they're saying, well, I'm not going to withhold my tithe. And it almost becomes a justification of a lack of generosity because there's a preferential disagreement with how that's spent. Where if you can kind of just, if you're not part of a local church and you don't trust the leadership, it's like, okay, there's a problem there,
Yeah.
right? And so I think the stories are fun and they're motivating, but they're secondary, right? In why we give.
Yeah, I think too, like the happiest people that I see, whether they're Christian or not, are the most generous people in the world.
100%.
And so, whenever I see clients that have a lot of money,
Yeah.
again, going back to like looking at their account history, they're constantly giving or they're constantly spending time with people.
Yeah.
Because even those people that can't spend a lot of money on things, they can still spend a lot of time with people, right? Or they can give in other ways. But when you're able to saying like, this money is not mine. I might have worked hard for it, but at the end of the day, it's still the Lord's.
Right.
And so how do I make sure I'm giving him his right amount, right? Whatever that sacrifice looks for you is going to be different. And so, if we think about the parable of like, the giver or the beggar, and she gave as much as she could. And then the rich guy that came up and he just gave his little stipend.
Right.
Even
though it was more than
it was more, it was a bigger sacrifice to her.
Right. It's not the dollar amount.
It's not the dollar amount. And so like,
so people could be embarrassed. Oh, I only gave $5. Well,
Right.
wait, hold on.
Absolutely.
Right. And so God can take that and he created the world out of nothing. Right.
Right. He doesn't need your money.
He's not sitting up there like, oh, I'd really like to do this for the world, but oh man,
My
person
budget.
X only gave me $7.
Yeah. But right. So it's a hard issue. Right. And so, but the happiest people in the world that I've seen are those that are able to say, I'm sacrificing this for my church because they can do more with it than I can.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't need it as much as I know that they can do with it.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool to see people go out of their way to say, I don't need Starbucks like every single day. I'll get it once a week, right? And I'm going to try to give Starbucks gift cards to people that I see, right? Just out of random generosity, which is super amazing.
Yeah. If you're going to do that, I'd probably go to like McDonald's or Tim Hortons.
Right.
Because you give them a $10 gift card, that's like half a drink.
There you go.
Starbucks.
That's fair. Or like one of their little donuts or something. Yeah.
So, in short, biblical pattern for giving is quite simple. It's give first, save second, spend third, which is upside down for our society.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Our society would
make your budget, give at the top.
Yeah. So give. That's the first thing on my expense line, right? Is give.
Yeah.
So biblical prescription is give, save, spend. Right? Spending last.
Yeah.
And so you're spending according to what comes out of giving and what you want to save for long term. Our world, our society, right, would be very different, right? It'd be spend, and if there's anything left over, save. And there's not going to be anything left over, so you don't give. That's kind of so it is flipped around. Proverbs is a big part of our culture when it comes to money is credit, right? And so as we mentioned, you said that for every dollar owed, it's $2.10, or sorry, for every dollar in income,
it's $2.10 owing, which is insane.
So Proverbs 22 says that the borrower is slave to the lender, and it's not saying that debt necessarily is a sin, but it can cross a line where there's a lack of stewardship and there's a lack of financial health and a lack of responsibility that can come with debt. And so I want to talk a little bit about debt. There's people listening today who are overwhelmed with debt. They're looking at their future. They're looking at their statements. The banks are calling. They're getting the notices in. And it's just like fear. It's just straight up fear. There's no hope. what would you say to that person to start working their way out of that scenario towards financial health? Financial health just feels like it's not for them.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to happen. What would you say to that person? Because I know that you see people
Every day.
who move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say?
The biggest success stories are those that just come in and talk, right? I would say a high majority of the people that would just come in and say, like, I have questions, I have no idea where to start, are those the people that start to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're in the mindset that you need to have a behavior change.
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing to say, like, oh, before this podcast, I never tithed, and now I'm just going to tithe. Well, you need to have a purpose behind it. There needs to be a heart change. There needs to be a reason why you're doing it. Otherwise, you're not going to stick to it. And so when you think about somebody that has a whole lot of debt, it's because naturally it's okay for you to look at a line of credit or look at a credit card and not think about the consequences. And so it's really teaching people what happens when you max out your credit card. Look at how much more money you actually have to spend on it. Where are you going to be in 10 or 15 years if you had that taken care of or not?
Right.
And so we do a lot of goal planning, a lot of like life adjustments to make sure that we can either take all their debt, make it into one simple consolidated loan payment,
Mm-hmm.
maybe close out some other products. But at the end of the day, we need to help make sure that the behavior is different. And so is it wise to leave a bunch of these credit cards open even after they're paid off?
Yeah.
Probably not.
So would I hear you, is this right, that you're suggesting the first step to getting out of the hole, right, that we can get in financially with debt is like humility.
Absolutely.
Like to be able to say, okay.
Well, because, money's
I know.
emotional. It's,
Yeah.
it's, shameful. Like, it's hard, especially when you have debt. People don't want to talk about it. But the most healthy thing that you can do is just open it all up. Here's my wounds,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who can help me heal them up?
Okay, so I've come in.
Okay.
I've said, hey, Austin, I'm in trouble. Look at my stuff. And I need to tackle this debt. What would you say to me? Where do I start?
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. I'm out of here. Give me my fee and see you later.
Really, I mean, what's funny is that Dave Ramsey has the idea of the snowball effect,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, from a simple approach, that's typically what we like to do to build up your confidence around a behavior.
Okay.
And so,
Explain what that is.
So the simple approach would be, let's say you had 3 different debts. Okay, let's say it's $1,000, $5,000, $10,000.
Okay.
Regardless of the interest rates and regardless of the payments, you're always going to tackle the smallest balance owing first.
Okay.
So let's say you paid off that $1,000. That monthly payment that you had going towards the $1,000 is going to be added to whatever you had excess of to pay that down quickly. So
Okay.
let's say it was an extra $50.
Okay.
That $50 is going to be added to whatever you're paying towards the $5,000.
Okay, so I got a $1,000 loan.
Yeah.
I'm paying $100. Let's say my interest is $50 on that. You're saying?
So no, like let's say you have a $1,000 loan,
Yeah.
a $5,000 loan, and a $10,000 credit card.
Yeah.
Okay. So your $1,000 loan, you have a $100 payment on.
Yeah.
Once that's paid down, your $100 that you're used to already paying
Yeah.
is going to be added to the
Right.
$5,000 one.
Right.
So let's say on their $5,000, you're used to paying $200 a month.
Gotcha.
Now
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
paying $300 a month to try to tackle that down.
Okay. So
A
it's
lot
snowball.
of people,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a snowball, right? But it's uphill. If you try to tackle the biggest one first, it's going to take you the longest. And you're going to get discouraged. It's going to be the hardest. And so people are like, oh, I'm just going to give up halfway through. And then you still have 3 debts. If you tackle the tiny guy first, it's rewarding. You're able to see, like, I'm able to do this, and you're able to actually move faster, right? Which is really cool. At the end of the day, from start to finish, you're going to spend the same amount of time paying it off. If we did the math, roughly about the same amount of time. Mentally, you're going to be on your own track a lot faster, which is really cool. And so being able to either set up the behaviors like that, help you realize what's actually important to you, and then setting yourself up for success, right? Like if we think about if you're not responsible and you want to be able to know yourself, right? Like if we did the analogy of like, if you want to be on a new diet, but you're going to keep all the same food in the fridge, it's going to be really hard when you
Right.
open up that fridge and you see like, a bunch of stuff that you
Are you
should
that
be eating.
Christmas person that sees all the sweets and just throws them out?
Yes,
Like January.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, like
yeah.
all the ladies in my family like to get together and make cookies.
Yeah.
They do,
So
like,
many cookies.
so many cookies, and like I'm like I can't even look at these things. Like
Yeah.
I need to like get rid of them,
Right.
and I'm like, oh honey, they're stale. Like
Yeah.
they're in the garbage, right? I hope she's not watching this, but
She's probably tuned out a long time ago.
it's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, she knows. But the same thing is true. You need to clear out the things and the behaviors that are not making you successful, right? And so whether that's closing those products or whether that's changing your behavior in a different method in order for you to find success. Taking out cash instead of using your debit cards, like those things are just so important for you to change your mindset. Yeah. Even like on your phone, like if you reorganize your apps, because it's so easy for you to just open up your phone, click on Instagram, click on whatever, and mindlessly scroll. Even if you keep Instagram, but you make it harder to find the app, you'll think twice sometimes about
I don't have the apps on my phone.
Yeah. Well, just in general, like any apps that are distracting.
No, but I'm saying for that, it's true, right? Because when I get rid of them, it's like I don't spend time on my phone, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually, by making those behavior changes, I change my behavior.
Totally.
Right.
Weird.
To where where I actually want to be and how I want to spend my time.
Yep.
Okay. I want to move maybe to the opposite end of the spectrum when we talk about finances. We talk about, I wouldn't say the opposite end of the spectrum, but let's talk about long-term planning.
Yeah.
Okay. We talk about debt. The long-term idea, it's a biblical idea. Like Proverbs 13 says that a righteous person leaves an inheritance for his children's children, right? His grandchildren. So that's deep, right? That is providing a legacy. That is financial health, right? That's flourishing, that's freedom. And so a lot of people either don't know how to plan for that, or they're not even thinking that because they're just thinking of the end of the month. And I understand that there's a lot of pressure that people are facing right now. And so, however, time is the key factor when it comes to long-term planning. So it is something that you do have to think about, right? And the best time to do it was yesterday, right? The second best time to start thinking about that is today, right? Taking action on that. I'm interested to hear your perspective on the tension or the balance between planning for the future and enjoying the moment, right? You never know. Life and death are in the hands of the Lord, right? And there are common graces that God has given everybody to enjoy, whether that is a vacation or whether it is something for your home or, whether it is a nice meal. These aren't bad things, right? These are good things that God has given us to enjoy. The problem, of course, is excess in doing these things when you don't have the funds for them. So what would you say to somebody who's trying to balance these two worlds? I'm a saver. I would prefer to negate the pleasures of the moment for the future. Or my wife's actually a little bit more balanced than me. I would say she's not the opposite of me, but she's a little bit more balanced than me, where she would say, no, Ken, we should do this, right? Not that we deserve it. We don't deserve a nice vacation. I don't feel like that, right? Did Jesus deserve a nice vacation? I don't know. Anyway, but it's more like, hey, we should do this. Let's enjoy what God has given us.
Totally.
Why wouldn't you? That almost feels wrong to not, so there's this balance.
It's a double-sided edge, right, of the sword. And so like a lot of people, what's frustrating is they don't even know how to dream. They don't know how to set a goal long-term. Like even think about retirement. If anybody listening to this right now is like, what do you want to do in retirement? If you actually have a structured idea about what day-to-day life would look like in retirement.
I have no idea.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm
just saving.
Everybody typically retires, like if you're able to live that long. What age do you want to retire? What are your
unless
hobbies?
they don't think about it, right? They can't retire if they don't think about it.
Right, and they don't think about it. But then people don't, in general, think about their goals.
Yeah.
Right? And so people get discouraged about even saving if they're not saving for something. Right? And so whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a vacation, retirement, being able to send your kids to school, giving kids like a wedding gift, stuff like that, you need to be really specific. So if I were to say like start there, be really specific, make a dream board if you want to about your goals. Doesn't matter the dollar amount. Just be very specific about what goals would you want to do with your money and then work backwards, right? So like I want to retire by, let's say I'm 65 years old, average retirement age. How do I make sure I get there? Right? You got to just work backwards. I want to be able to give my kids a wedding gift. My son is 4 months old. So I have a lot of time to save, which is great. Or send them to school. Right. And so, you just want to make sure that you're very specific with that goal. So it's same thing. If I said, I want to send my kid to school, when he's 18 years old, if I'm like, oh, he's going to be a doctor one day, I need to save a lot more than if I'm just going to give him 10 grand, right? In 18 years, I need to start saving like over 100 grand, right? And so being very specific with your goals actually gives you a lot more power to say what's workable, what's feasible, and what are you able to do? And then humble yourself and say, I'm not making enough, or I need to cut my expenses here to make that budget kind of work, right? And so it all kind of comes down to not being afraid to have that conversation with somebody at the bank, with your spouse. As I say that too, the other thing that I would say that people trip up on is you'd be surprised the number of people that don't have joint accounts with their spouse.
Mm.
That everything's still separate. Right? Like my wife pays this bill, my husband pays that bill. And my wife, the mortgage comes out of her account, I just e-transfer her every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like that's exhausting.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
you know, especially as a Christian couple, if you're one flesh, why isn't your account at least one account?
You're gonna have people who vehemently disagree with that, but I'm on your side. Yeah,
and that's my opinion. If you're truly, as a married couple, trying to get to the same place financially, and you're ashamed of your financial history or you're ashamed about your spending habits, there's nothing better that you can do than just be on the same page with your spouse.
Transparent.
And so even if those are baby steps where it's like, let's have a joint savings account, you want to get to a place where it's an open book to each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so I know for myself that made a huge difference on my responsibility of second guessing, should I buy something?
Right. Because it's ours, not just
it's
mine.
ours.
Yeah.
It's not the money I made. Right. It's the money that's ours. Right. My income is now my wife's income.
Right.
And so, but even if that's already true, it's a different mindset.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, you know, when it comes, again, pastorally and challenges in relationships, there are the usual suspects that that cause problems among spouses, right? One is sex, one is communication, but one big one often is money.
Money.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's money.
Thanks for inviting me here to talk about it.
Great. Okay. So thanks for your time. Yeah. I want you to say one more thing. Okay. There's people, again, watching, listening, who have fear and no hope about tomorrow and the end of the month and next year, let alone 65 or what retirement looks like. What would you say to them? How would you encourage them as a Christian man who also understands kind of what financial health looks like? What's one or two things that you just say just to encourage them today?
With anything, like even when you become a new Christian, you want to learn as much as you can about God and about the Bible. So what do? You start reading about the Bible. You start reading about the Lord, and you put yourself in a situation where you're surrounded by Christian people. Why isn't that true with money? Why don't you want to surround yourself with people that are financially successful? Go to the bank, talk to people.
And when we're talking about success, you're not talking about billionaires and millionaires. You're
but
talking
just
about
people that are comfortable talking about money, right? You want to educate yourself. You want to truly be able to look up free financial literacy courses, whether that's YouTube, hopefully not.
Yeah.
But there's actual courses that are offered at like the libraries set up by United Way or other things that are free financial literacy courses that you can actually just say like, I'm now smarter on this topic.
Right. That changed things for me.
It's huge. And, you know, like if you're truly passionate about wanting to be more financially free, set up parameters, have a strong budget, you can't just walk away from this and say, I'm just going to do it. Right? That's like saying you don't know how to ride a bike and now I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to hop on the bike, right? Why wouldn't you want somebody to hold those handlebars with you and make sure that you're taking those pedals the right way, right? Yeah. And you're going down the street at a right speed. Because if you just try to jump into something, you're either going to sink or swim, right? And so I would say the best thing you can do is try to educate yourself on financial literacy. Google financial literacy courses.
Our church actually has one coming up,
right?
Financial Peace University. I don't know if we call it that, but it's based off that. And it is great.
It's awesome. Yeah, I hosted that for 4 years.
Oh, did you hear?
Yeah, it's
cool.
great.
Yeah,
and,
we have one coming up like right away.
I don't think I'm hosting it. I wasn't invited to.
Okay, you probably not.
Right, but yeah, educate yourself, right? Get comfortable with it. The more you talk about money in a safe environment, the less scary it becomes, right? The more aware you are about your own money and how it comes in and out, the less intimidating and less shameful it's going to be.
And it becomes fun.
Right.
Right? When you start saying, oh, okay, this is what greater health looks like. I can do this, right? And when you apply some discipline, when you apply a prayerful heart towards this area of your life, it actually becomes fun to see. Just like when you're in the gym and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I have an ab, right? I never thought I had an ab before, right? When you start to see a little bit of that, you're just kind of like, I can do this. And it
Don't be the person taking selfies in the mirror,
right? And that, speaking of snowball, that snowballs, right? When you're just like, I can do this. Oh, what's my next goal, right? But just that first step can be so tough.
And like, you know, I grew up as a kid hoarding my loonies, right? Because I didn't know what was happening with them. And now I'm really confident with where I'm at today, what money's coming in and going out. And, you know, like right now I'm on pat leave. I've been off with my newborn 4-month-old. And we haven't really had to worry at all. Right? Like, because we had everything in place for me to be off so that we could spend time with family.
So that to me looks like financial health.
Yeah.
Right? Not millionaire, you know, not driving around in a, right? But but there's financial health there
Right.
where there's some freedom,
Yeah.
right? You're not a
Confidence.
slave
Yep.
to that number in your bank account or to that bill coming
Yeah.
up. And so, yeah. Well, my hope is that, you know, as you're watching this today, that you can move from a place of fear with your money to a place of hope. Really, God does want you to move forward. He's with you in this. Your church is with you in this. So I would encourage you, take that next step, whatever that looks like, whether that is talking to somebody, whether that's creating a budget, whether that's just coming in and receiving prayer with your small group leader or maybe a pastor, or just talking to someone with some help. We'd love to be able to help you take that next step. But we believe in you. We think that you can do this. And thank you so much for watching.